So the danger model is a new view of how the immune system works. The old view is that the immune system functions by discriminating between self and non-self, and that you learn self early in life, and that everything that appears later is considered non-self and you fight it. And I had some real problems with that. For example, if we learn self early in life, what happens when we go through puberty and we change? What happens when females start to lactate and make new proteins? I mean, most newly lactating breasts don't fall off. So, the old view didn't seem to work for me when I was a graduate student. So it took 20 years, and I came up with an alternative, and that is that no, the immune system doesn't function by discriminating between self and non-self. It functions by discriminating between things that do damage and things that don't. I mean, you don't have to make an immune response to a virus that comes in, makes 3 copies of itself, and leaves, and does no damage. You don't have to make an immune response to everything you eat and breathe. You don't have to make an immune response to the fetuses that you carry, or the sperm that begot them. Right? You need to make an immune response to things that are going to harm you. So the danger model starts with the idea that the immune system is normally off, and that it gets turned on when cells that are injured send alarm signals saying that they're injured. Right? So it's kind of the difference between the old model would be like a community that has a police force that is constantly patrolling for foreigners. And they define foreigners as anyone that wasn't around when they were growing up. The new view is more like a fire department in that they sit in their fire station and play cards until somebody rings an alarm. And so that's the idea with the danger model, that the immune system doesn't care about anything that enters the body. You have bacteria that help, that make vitamin K to help your blood clot, for example. You don't want to get rid of them. What it does is it responds when an injured cell sends an alarm signal. It turns out that if you make that assumption, you can explain almost everything the immune system seems to do right and almost everything it seems to do wrong. And you can explain it with that single one assumption over and over again, that you don't get an immune response unless you have injury. So the reason you reject a transplant, which is foreign, and you don't reject the fetus, which is also foreign, is that in the process of doing a transplant, you do injury. Surgeons cut, they burn small vessels, they put organs on helicopters and fly them around the country, and they get ischemia and post-reperfusion ischemia, which is cell injury. The fetus, while it's developing, if it's not injured, sends no alarm signals and doesn't turn on an immune response from its mother. So even though both are kind of foreign transplants, the danger model says one of them doesn't get rejected because it doesn't look dangerous, and the other one gets rejected because it does look dangerous. The need to deal with injury has been around since the beginning of life. The first cells, bacteria, and the first eukaryotic cells needed to be able to repair when they got injured. So how did they know when they got injured? So there are actually 2 basic categories of signals that signal injury. One of them is nucleic acid. So DNA and RNA are inside cells and not outside cells. If a cell blows open, it's going to release its DNA, its RNA, its nucleic acids. This is a sure sign of injury because they're never outside cells normally. So other cells in that environment that all of a sudden sense DNA or RNA will know that their neighbors have had some kind of injury or at least non-physiological event. So that's one kind of signal. It doesn't matter whether that signal is from an infectious agent, which has DNA and RNA. It doesn't matter if that's from a lysed heart cell when you have a heart attack, which also has DNA and RNA. In both cases, your immune system will respond. The other kind of signal is a particular kind of chemical entity. So it's hydrophobic molecules, so oils. So there's something interesting about life. Life evolved in water. And because it evolved in water, lipids or hydrophobic molecules are both useful and dangerous. They're useful because they have this tendency to get away from water. So if you have an oil in water, it gets away from water and it aggregates. So you make cell membranes from hydrophobic molecules and they keep the water out. You hold proteins together by having hydrophobic inner cores to the proteins, and that holds the proteins in the right shape. Now, that's the useful part of hydrophobic molecules. The dangerous part of hydrophobic molecules is that should these hydrophobic pieces, like the insides of proteins, get exposed, then they will non-specifically aggregate, and you will just get these glops inside cells. It's not good for cells. So, since the very beginning of life, cells have gone to great trouble to not allow the exposure of hydrophobic portions of molecules. So, for example, when a protein is being formed, so you have messenger RNA, and you have little bits of protein that are being made off of this RNA, the parts of the protein that would normally be inside when that protein folds will be exposed. And they're hydrophobic. And that's not good because they're just going to aggregate with each other. And so what happens when these proteins are being made is there are special other proteins whose function is to bind to those hydrophobic pieces, and they're called chaperones or heat trap proteins, and hide them. So that's one kind of dealing with hydrophobicity. When you eat fat, and it gets from your stomach into your bloodstream or your intestine into your bloodstream, there's special proteins in your bloodstream that bind to it and prevent them from just aggregating. So there's all this energy that living things put into keeping hydrophobic things hidden. So what we postulated was that should any hydrophobic thing get exposed, it would act as an alarm signal to tell a cell that something has gone wrong. And if you look at the signals that activate immune systems, you'll find that they fall into two categories. They're either hydrophobic, right? So LPS is a hydrophobic molecule from bacteria that stimulates the immune system. Lipoteichoic acid is a hydrophobic molecule from bacteria that stimulates the immune system. Hyaluron, when it breaks down, releases hyaluron, is a molecule that lines our blood vessels. And it's a polymer. And when it breaks down, like when you get bruised or you cut yourself, it exposes hydrophobic pieces, and that acts as an alarm system that stimulates the immune system. So you have the hydrophobic pieces, and you have the nucleic acids. And the thing about them is, it doesn't matter if they're from infectious agents. Infectious agents have DNA and RNA. They also have hydrophobic proteins and lipids. Right? We have DNA and RNA, and we have hydrophobic proteins and lipids. If there's any kind of damage, whether of an infectious agent itself, or of us from an infectious agent, or of us from a non-infectious agent, the immune system is going to respond. It's incredibly ancient. And actually, if you think about it, it's really cool. If you were a bacterium living in a colony of other bacteria, and one of your colony mates died and released its RNA, you might want to know that. And you might want to know that because it would be a signal that you had to do something different. You either needed to, upregulate a different enzyme system, or you needed to sporulate, or you needed to move, you needed to get out of there. You need to know that your colony mates are dying so you can do something. So this is really ancient, and I think that the immune system has piggybacked on this really ancient system of detecting injury, which was done anciently in order to do repair, so that we can do both repair and turn on an immune response. Let's take a heart attack. So we know that when you get a heart attack, you get cell ischemia. You get cells dying necrotically. You get cells dying badly. And the immune system discriminates between good death and bad death. So good death happens all the time. right? When you're a fetus and you want to take this primitive structure and make a hand out of it, the way you do that is you kill off the cells between the fingers, and that's called programmed cell death. And the cells die, and they get scavenged by their neighbors so that no debris comes out. But when the heart gets a heart attack, you don't get blood there, and you get what's called necrotic death. You need to repair that. So the necrotic death releases alarm signals, I think. The alarm signals bring in repair mechanisms, these ancient evolutionary repair mechanisms. And at the same time, it tells the cells, some special cells that are there in the heart called dendritic cells, that something bad has happened. And they do something really interesting. They get the same alarm signals that start the repair mechanisms. So the repair starts. And in the meantime, the dendritic cells wake up. They drink their environment. They can take up their volume every hour. They get rid of the water they have drunk. They keep the pieces of stuff they have drunk. And they take it to a local lymph gland. So if you get measles, they take it to here. If it's the heart, it's to one in the heart. And there, they sit there, and they take everything they've chewed up, and they stick it on their surface in special molecules called MHC molecules. And they display that to passing by T cells. And the T cells are passing by, and every so often one of them recognizes, let's say, a piece of that heart that the dendritic cell has picked up and is displaying, or a piece of bacterium which also comes from the same environment, or a virus which is coming from that environment. T cell sees it, stops, gets signaled, starts an immune response. So if you look in the literature, you find that between 20 and 50% of people who have heart attacks have transient immune responses to their own heart tissue. And the immune response starts, it goes for a few weeks, and as the heart heals, as the repair mechanism keeps going, the immune response also goes away. So I think it's the same signals starting both. Repair starts immediately. The immune response also starts immediately. When the heart heals, the immune response stops. When cells that are injured send alarm signals saying that they're injured. Right? So it's kind of the difference between the old model would be like a community that has a police force that is constantly patrolling for foreigners. And they define foreigners as anyone that wasn't around when they were growing up. So, the old view didn't seem to work for me when I was a graduate student. So it took 20 years, and I came up with an alternative, and that is that no, the immune system doesn't function by discriminating between self and non-self. It functions by discriminating between things that do damage and things that don't. I mean, you don't have to make an immune response to a virus that comes in, makes 3 copies of itself, and leaves, and does no damage. You don't. So the danger model is a new view of how the immune system works. The old view is that the immune system functions by discriminating between self. You don't have to make an immune response to everything you eat and breathe. You don't have to make an immune response to the fetuses that you carry or the sperm that begot them. Right? You need to make an immune response to things that are going to harm you. So the danger model starts with the idea that the immune system is normally off and that it gets turned on in non-self, and that you learn self early in life, and that everything that appears later is considered non-self and you fight it. And I had some real problems with that. For example, if we learn self early in life, what happens when we go through puberty and we change? What happens when females start to lactate and make new proteins? I mean, most newly lactating breasts don't fall off.